The following video is sponsored by THQ Nordic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about Outcast: A New Beginning. This is a open world sci-fi single player action adventure game. It's coming from Appeal Studios. There's a demo available right now. The game already came out on March 15th, so I've been spending some time with it, and THQ reached out, wanted me to check this game out. You know my rule for sponsored videos. I'm not going to do it unless I can say whatever I want, even if that means I walk away not liking it. What I will say is that Outcast from the get-go spoke to me on a level of budget. I found myself quite disenfranchised with AAA gaming as the disappointments mount up. And so when I see something that's more in the AA space, especially after PAX East, where I spend so much time looking at and playing AA and indie games, I feel the spirit is really there. It brings me back to the times of the Xbox 360 and the PS3, where I feel like games were being made at their best. They weren't too long, they weren't too short, they were ambitious and creative like we saw in the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and original Xbox era, but still had enough power in the hardware to do some pretty ambitious things. And so Outcast: A New Beginning called my name from that direction. I'm not going to sit here and try to sell it to you like, yo, this is the big AAA banger, this thing blew my mind, bro. But it did call my attention in a very specific way. So did it deliver? Well, we're going to get into a little bit of a history lesson, and I'll talk about my experience with Outcast: A New Beginning. So when it comes to Outcast, like I mentioned, there's a bit of history with this one. There was originally Outcast in 1999. This was a pretty popular PC game that really did a lot of things that were unseen at its time. The animation, the world, the scale, the gameplay elements. While it was during my time, I was barely cognizant at that point. I was 4 years old, so I was not going to be playing Outcast, unfortunately. So this one I'd never really heard of until this game, Outcast: A New Beginning, which functions basically as a sequel to that original game. Now, let's say you look at what you're seeing on screen here and you go, well, hey, this looks pretty cool. I actually learned in the process of doing research for this video that there's Outcast: Second Contact, which is a remake to the original game. And I do have to tip my cap to that, just generally speaking, that I feel we too often get focused on the big IP and the licensed games. And I like that over here we have this thing from 1999 that has not only come back in a remake, but then it got itself a sequel. So there's a fan base out there somewhere. So that's your brief history lesson on Outcast. As for the game we're talking about today, A New Beginning, this is, as I mentioned, an open world game. You know how I feel about open world games nowadays. You need to have very little bloat to your content in order to pull me in. Fortunately, when I was playing the game and roaming around, there were a handful of activities that you could pick up. You were able to do what is effectively a platforming challenge. This platforming definitely takes some getting used to, as I'll talk about later with some of the power options and the scaling in this game. It's a little slow, but you do get more recovery options as the jetpack can be upgraded, so these platforming sections get more complex and more challenging, so I think it scales properly. Otherwise, there is one where you can clear out pretty much a corruption in the land. It's pretty much a combat challenge. You take out a bunch of enemies, you clear out some burrows, and then you get a good reward at the end of it all. So like I mentioned, this is an action game, but I also didn't mention this is an action RPG. There's a skill system, there's leveling up, there's equipment, all that stuff you can augment. And so as you're running around this world and killing things, you're going to get skill points. You can upgrade your movement options where you can glide around on your jetpack. Some of the movement in this game is pretty sick. The combat is a little more, I would say, minimalistic. If I were to define this game and its world and its inspirations from what I can see as someone who has not played the original Outcast and is just stepping into this, what I see here is a game that has a world that's very, nowadays I would say people make the connection to things like Avatar, you know, Frontiers of Pandora recently came out, but like the movies from James Cameron, and also Horizon. It's very tropical but sci-fi, so I think those connections are going to be made. So the world space itself is nice to look at, but one thing I should prepare you for is that this game really doesn't hold your hand, especially with some of the initial introductions to the UI, like navigating where quests are, how to find them. I'll admit I was a little confused at first. Like, for example, I had this one point where I was talking to the Almayel, and to progress my quest, instead of marking these individuals I had to speak to, it was in a radius. I'm like, okay, whatever. And you talk to them, and instead of having in this dialogue wheel clearly marked options of what like progresses your quest and what doesn't, it's a good case study for like what would happen if Mass Effect didn't color coordinate certain things for Paragon, Renegade, questions asked, general dialogue, and what would just progress the plot, right? Because they use red, yellow, blue, and all these things would help you understand like what would move things forward and what wouldn't. But this game doesn't do that. So they have these random conversations and moments in the quest where they tell you like, hey, go do this, and you kind of just select random dialogue options, and so you're kind of unsure what will move things forward and what won't. But also some of the dialogue is very exposition heavy, which can be taken as a negative for some. For me, I don't think it's the end of the world. I'm a Trails fan though, so I like lots of dialogue, I like lots of world building, and this game definitely has it. One thing I did really like about the dialogue system, though, is the glossary system. I feel like this world is packed with lore, packed with terminology, and that's totally okay, especially when you have an answer for it. It's something I first saw with Pentiment, and I really liked how they did it, where these characters all across history were being referenced and brought up, and as someone who's not a history buff, I was sitting there going, not really following what you're saying here, but this helped pull those puzzle pieces, if you will, together, and it was a great addition to that game that made me connect with the story deeper. Same thing's kind of going on here. You see all these various terms popping up, you hold the right trigger, all of a sudden a big glossary pops up, just giving you brief definitions of things that you've heard, like what's the Ulukai? What are all these various tribes? What's the name of this planet? And it's a good way just to refresh the memory, and it shows a little bit of self-awareness in that they were doing something with the writing team where they stayed very in-world with its dialogue without trying to over-explain things in certain moments, but realizing that with the use of this terminology, players will just have the dialogue glance off them and it won't make too much sense. So I thought this was a great addition to the game. Otherwise, cutscene sequences, it's, oh man, it's very AA in spirit, and I feel like this is one of those moments where for some people they're actually gonna really like this. I personally sat there and went, you know, this reminds me again of like a 360 game where the voice acting is okay enough. It's not perfect. You play as Cutter Slade, hilarious name by the way, but I love it, and this dude is so awkward, the way he speaks, the way he approaches things. Whoa, I'm just a friend. Like, he kind of sounds in a way like Buzz Lightyear. I don't know, but he's such a generic dude that it kind of makes him fun to watch on screen because he's such a hero in these big moments, but he's so uninspiring, frankly. So I got a kick out of him as the main lead here. He's not poorly acted or anything. He's just kind of and that's the charm of it. I know I sound like I'm overselling it, but truthfully, like when I look at these AA games, sometimes these are the things that call people in, because in AAA, everything's got to be perfect, well acted, big stars. And here in this AA kind of indie scene, you get something a little different that I think works. Is it perfect? Hell no. But is it kind of charming? Yeah, kinda. For a quick brush up on this story, and I won't spoil much, you're playing as Cutter Slade, you transport to another dimension, you lose your memories. In the process, you discover this new, almost alien-like race, and you're a bit confused, a bit out of place. I feel the relationship between the human opposing force and this alien race that's being threatened by humans ends up being a little too chummy too quickly, especially because you learn fast that the humans are actually the invading race here on this planet, and very quickly, without much moral dilemma at all, this gentleman, Cutter Slade, ends up going against humans as he discovers more and more about his past and why he's even here in the first place. So it's a mixture of a journey of self-discovery, if you will, at the same time as this very Avatar-inspired plot. It's a pretty simple third-person shooter. I think the systems are there to make the combat really great. Like, when I look at it systemically, when I look at the mechanics and I look at the controls, it controls well, feels good, but I feel like it's almost a half step away from being where Andromeda is. And Andromeda, while I'm not a fan of it as a Mass Effect game, has some pretty excellent third-person shooting combat with its movement options, the floating in midair, all the gun options, power options. I feel like Outcast is getting there. It just takes a little bit longer through the powerful abilities that you're going to unlock. It's gradual and you're going to get them through completing villages, but it takes time. It's not immediate. And so I think some people might step into this and go, oh, this is nothing, man. And then as you play the game more, it gives back to you. So there is that push and pull that Outcast provides. You can get things like modules to add to your weapons, which will change how they function. Like I had a pistol that was semi-auto. I put a module on it, it turned it into a machine pistol. As you upgrade your character through skill points, you can get new modules that can add all these different enhancements to your weapon. And I do think that's pretty cool. That's where the kind of RPG aspects come into play, and I do appreciate that quite a bit. It is not just this tropical world. There are other biomes that you're going to see throughout this main story. You're going to go to like a snow area, for example. So if you see this tropical setting, go, oh, this is wildly familiar, just know it does eventually vary things up. But overall, I walked away from it, again, not like, oh, I love this thing. It's charming, it's solid. Things like the open world and the diversity of visuals you find will be appealing. I think the style of game, I know I've mentioned jank here and there, but like that is an appeal to a ton of people out there, and I get it. Like it appeals to me too in many instances. There are some really wild creature designs here that you're going to be shooting and looting, so there is some good stuff here for sure. What I would say is this: if you watch this video, you got this deep, you're wondering, you know, is this something I should spend my time with? That's the most valuable resource nowadays when you have so many different games coming out constantly. The best thing I can say definitely is THQ offering you a demo. So you don't even need to watch this video. You don't even need to hear what I have to say. Go play it for yourself. See how it is. If you see something appealing here, if what I said does sound fun to you, then just go ahead and download it. They got 3 modes available for you. Like, it's a pretty chunky demo. You can get a feel for the game and see if it's something you want to end up buying at the end of the day. Try the demo out. If you end up really digging it, cool. There you go. You just found a game that's flying under the radar. That's what's been really interesting about these opening parts of the year. There's been a lot of games coming out, but for me, I feel they've all been massive, long in the tooth games, whereas something here in Outcast: A New Beginning presents what I think is a game that is digestible, that you can avoid the side content if you want to, but it's very easy to complete it all. It's a game that I feel is necessary when we're burdened by games that, even if they're fantastic, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is, you know, I just finished it at 60 something hours, and that's considered short for people who are doing the 100% playthrough. But there are a lot of games that are taking up a ton of time. Persona 3 Reload's like 80 plus hours. You know, so many games coming out that are great, but long. This one is a little more digestible, so that could speak to you more. Try out the demo. I personally enjoyed it enough to say that much about it, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. I know this is one flying under the radar, so many of you probably haven't played it, but what do you think of what I've showed today, what I've had to say about it today? Let me know down below. Again, appreciate THQ Nordic sponsoring today's video, and with that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.